And before we actually jump to the main part of the webinar, that's our two very exciting presentations, I would like still to use first few minutes while more and more participants are joining us, as we have over hundreds registrations for this very vibrant topic. I would like to use this opportunity to introduce first myself and Gundula, with whom we are organizing this webinar. We run different innovation boosters within their Innosuisse program, and myself is responsible for Digital Health Nation that's operated by Basel area and DayOne Accelerator. We are based in Basel, and it's already the second year on which we are running the Digital Health Nation booster. And this year we have different topics on our agenda in which we'll then later on select 20 ideas and guide them through their 4 ideation stages to develop from MVP to from idea to MVP actually. And one of the topics is healthcare information quality and access and interoperability. In this matter, this webinar today is also very important for us as the platform to give you a chance to generate your own ideas and probably come up with some potential collaboration partners and further to apply into participating into the program. But we'll share more details later on. Gundula, do you want to continue and introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So my name is Gundula. I'm managing director of the leading house of the Databooster and as well the Booster manager. So the Databooster is pushing innovation in database services for the manufacturing and service sector. And of course, we are using novel technologies and of course, new concepts. And our main topics are not only in pharma, but also in Industry 4.0 and building smart services. And the new topic for this year is how to build responsible AI solutions. And if you are curious, of course, you can look on our webpage, databooster.ch.
Thank you. Yes, actually, I also just posted in the chat the links to our LinkedIn pages where we, as both boosters, always share the latest news and also information about the events and calls for applications, as well as a lot of other relevant information. So check it out and follow. And if you have any questions regarding either of the programs, you can contact me or Gundula directly. We'll also share our contact details in the chat and then in the follow-up emails. But before we proceed with the presentations, I also want to mention one very important point. This is the Q&A policy. As the presentations go, we would encourage you to post your questions in the chat so we can keep track of them. We're going to have around 20 minutes dedicated to each talk and then around 5 to 7 minutes for a Q&A after each of the presentations. So you can either post your question in the chat or you can raise your hand as we move towards the Q&A part and then jump in directly in our virtual space and ask your question yourself. And if you have some questions left at the end, we can also come back to them and run a small panel if we have time for that. And I wanted to mention that this session is not only the opportunity for you to learn something new and to listen, but also we want to treat it as an opportunity for you to come up with your own innovative solutions and ideas that can actually also benefit to this paradigm shift of the clinical data reuse. And if you would have such idea already on top of your mind as we go, please share the call for collaboration in the chat, as well as if you don't yet have the idea, but are really interested in the topic and want to meet new people who share interest, you can post your short personal introduction or LinkedIn info in the chat so other participants can see that and reach out to you as we go. And without further ado, I think it's a high time then for me to give the virtual stage to Thomas. Thomas, welcome, and thank you so much for contributing to this event.
Thank you very much. With some luck, you should see my slides now. I think it should have worked.
Super, it works.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure for me to talk here, and I'm at the moment a teacher at the Bern University of Applied Sciences for medical informatics. And part of what I'm telling here comes from previous work positions. So I was always involved with clinical information systems and their implementation. I had worked previously at several German university hospitals. And the first slide actually shows the Deming cycle. You might ask yourself, why did I put a Deming cycle on the first slide? One of the reasons is that data reuse has to do very much with the idea of bringing data from patient treatment back into improving patient treatment. That means we want to share the data, we want to reuse data, we want to know what worked on the patients, what didn't work. And that is very much what the Deming circle actually tries to implement. And that's the main part of clinical data reuse. I'm here for more or less the overview, and Sebastiano in the second part will take you much more into detail. He will give you a very current example, what he is working on at Balgrist Hospital and how he is trying to get things together. For my part, I will just try to get you into the technical background, what needs to be done in order to get data from clinical information systems, and in my part, mostly from hospital information systems into other database environments to work with that data. What are the technical obstacles? What is the semantic problem which we have to make the IT systems understand each other? And also some remaining open issues which still stay when you are finished with all the work. Technically, you will find out that the clinical data cannot be always used just as it is, but there will be some topics which need to be solved. The promises of clinical data reuse are mainly you could take data from different institutions, multiple institutions in multicentric studies, and could get it digitally for your research to, for example, find out, will it be possible to do a certain study, to find out, will we be able to get the required patients for the study within a short time, to support the clinical trial execution and maybe further. And the example I have given here in the background is a project EHR for clinical research, in which we participated with my former site, University Hospital of Erlangen, a couple of years ago. You will find our sign down here, Friedrich Alexander University. I wasn't in lead of a project, but obviously the participation in that project influenced very much what we did. And within that project, we worked together with several international sites, for example, with the Hospital Georges Pompidou in Paris, and tried to share our data to build up a common database and see if we can do something about research with that. Another certainly current topic is we have more and more genetic data of patients available. And during my time here at the Bern University of Applied Sciences, I was able to accompany a project of some students who work together with the Inselspital. And their idea was, if the patients have a full genetic footprint, why can't we reuse that data and integrate it directly into the clinical system in order to, for example, give advice if a patient is a poor metabolizer of the dihydropyrimidine dehydrogenase, you shouldn't give that patient a certain chemotherapeuticum called 5-fluorouracil. And we incorporated that in the then existing clinical information system in the hope that that could be an example how genetic data and clinical data could be joined together. There are many other examples like this one, but I'm just giving it because all the genetic data gains much more value if you can join it with the clinical data of a respective patient, with tumor data of a patient or whatever else, in order to have an added value so that you can see what works on this patient, what works on that patient. My personal use case is a different one. Originally, as I said, I come from an area of introducing clinical information systems. For example, at Münster University Hospital, I introduced the hospital information system. At Erlangen, I was also active in that area, introducing the IT system for the intensive care units. But later on, I was also asked to supervise from our part, from the Medical Informatics Institute, how could we come to an integrated documentation for all our cancer patients. At Erlangen, we have something called a tumor center, which has a central and clinical cancer registry, not only for the Erlangen University Hospital, but for the region of Mittelfranken. And we wanted to integrate and reuse our clinical data from our hospital information system. At the time, it was the Sorian system via interface into the tumor register, but we wanted also to integrate data from other nearby hospitals, such as Nuremberg or Fürth or Martha Maria, into that system via different interfaces. And we wanted to integrate the data from external physicians. For example, many of the pathology reports are being done at physicians who are working outside of the hospitals or mobile study nurses. And we wanted to integrate that into the clinical cancer registry. The background was that at the time I was there, Erlangen University Hospital was certified as a cancer center and was also building a comprehensive cancer center with the other hospitals. And as a part of research, we had also some research projects within that these tasks. For example, we were part of the Polypro project where we tried to participate with other hospitals in a multicentric study to transfer data in a clinical trials database and do explorative analysis. And we were part in the prostate cancer documentation, which was thriving towards building up a nationwide prostate cancer research database being geared by the German Prostate Cancer Consortium. So if you go into a hospital, you will mostly find something which is called from the outside hospital information system. From the inside, you will find out that this system is comprised of many, many different components. I have here the Erlangen example, and you have, for example, up here the admission discharge transfer system, which also does all the finances. You have here the clinical component for the normal wards, which is, for example, the Sorian system. But for the intensive care units, you have another component because the intensive care units will work mainly with the intensive care system. On the other hand side, you have many departmental functional systems, such as a laboratory system, a pathology system, a radiology system, a picture archive. You will have different IT systems for the theater and for the pharmacies and so on. maybe even own systems to do with chemotherapy and chemotherapy schemata. And typically those systems communicate with each other via a so-called communication server. At the time it was a product called eGate. And maybe that communication server has also a database to store the data and forward it in case one of the participants is just at the moment not available. So how do you do data reuse with that conglomerate of different applications? Well, one first approach, which is being implemented in many larger hospitals, is a so-called data warehouse. At that stage, you do an extract, for example, with transformation and loading into a data warehouse component. And we did that at Erlangen too, because we needed that for the DRG and the calculation purposes. So we had Cognos Data Manager, but you will find out this data warehouse is not the one which the clinicians are going or wanting to use for the research. So maybe you need extra components. And only for the research part, for example, we had to establish study databases. We used the SecoTrial. We had to establish biobanking. We had to establish a registry which studies are being produced at the moment at the University Hospital. We had the tumor cancer registry system and so on. So all these systems come in as an add-on, and you might find yourself also confronted that you need to have a second data warehouse component, which you really can open to the clinicians for the research, and where you can do scientific research. We used at that time the I2B2, an American development, which has been promoted. At the base of this, you have to deal with different standards, and depending on which system you get the data from, you have messages like HL7 version 2 messages. In this example, it's a lab message, which you could take and store and forward within your communication server. I showed the database beforehand. You can have documents. I've taken here an example from Swiss CDA, so it's not a typical document for research, but document-based communication is often relying on something like clinical document architecture, an HL7 standard, which tells you how to specify and structure document content. You may have images. Images come typically in the DICOM standard, digital imaging and communications, which essentially is an image itself, so the original data plus an image header. And this is an object-oriented standard where a service is used by a service user and provided by a service provider. And you might, in recent developments, find always FHIR, Fast Healthcare Integration Standards. That is more or less service calls. So you could establish a so-called FHIR server, and within that FHIR server, you can put down your documents. You need to add some security and interaction measures, because FHIR itself doesn't set any security. So if you have an open FHIR server, you can do with the data whatever you want. And the content which you transfer is so resources. For example, that is part of a patient resource. And if you want to use observations on that patient, you need to have an observation resource joined to that patient in order to reuse the data. So at the baseline, you will need to look at what type of data do you get from which system. And as I said beforehand, the ETL approach is again a little bit different. The ETL approach tries to approach the databases of the underlying systems and tries to extract via, for example, SQL statements, the data into a data warehouse. That is more or less the first and the technical part which you need to deal with, and you will succeed in one way or another. For example, we took some of the cancer data via our eGate communication server. We took it into the intermediate database. We did some conversions and prepared it from there on to be transferred into the cancer registry. But then you have to think about contents. Typical hospital information systems are structured in a way that you can do your own forms. And if you are unlucky, and that's the normal situation, every hospital will do its documentation, for example, for cancer in its own way. So that were the forms we used in Erlangen University Hospital. We had a generic form, which was, for example, used for the tumor board, where the patient was first seen, and we had the organ-specific cancer documentation, where we have, for example, here the prostate cancer, where you have much more detail, such as the prostata antigen and anything else. This will show you if the patient has a relapse of his cancer, for example. And you will then need to extract that data into another format, for example, to make it compatible with other hospitals for the reuse, or to make it, in our case, compatible with the cancer registry. To give you an example here, from our lab system, we received in pathology cases an TNM state like this one, YPT2A, and that needs to be split up for the registry into the components, which means this is a preliminary therapy which has been done. This is the pathologic part. That means it has been defined on a pathological level, and it's a 2A status and so on. And you have some additional info, for example, which needs also to be split up. The problem will be that you need to do that in a repeated fashion. That means it doesn't suffice if you do that once, but if you have changes in the clinical system, and you will encounter such changes, you have to repeat that. So at the end, you need to do some sort of mapping work, and you should do that mapping in a way that it can be repeated. We at Erlangen, for example, developed some ontological tools which could just read in all the fields from the clinical system and could repeat the mapping again for the same fields, and only the new fields you would need to add additional data. And at the end, you get to some kind of processing pipeline, or you must establish a processing pipeline. An example for such a processing pipeline is here for the urology. You start with the clinical information in the Zorian system. You do the translation part. You do a preparation in our case, at the communication server, prepare the data for import in the cancer registry system, do the semantic mapping. And at the end, you will find out that you have manual steps inside. So the cancer registry will not tolerate that you just feed the data automatically into their register, because they have very high requirements in terms of data quality, and they will review the imported data sets before they really take them and accept them on the other hand side. That was our case here. So if you do that, and you are finished on the technical and semantical part, you have established the understanding between the system, you will need to ask yourself about completeness, consistency, and validity of your data. And how the requirements on these three will depend on the use case which you have as a secondary use case. So it will not be the primary use case, but the secondary use case, which mandates certain requirements on completeness and consistency. You want to have unambiguous data, which is not so easy as it sounds like, and data which can be interpreted. To give you a couple of examples, in practical cases, you will find out that your data is inconsistent between some of the partial systems which constitute your hospital information system. We, for example, noted we had cases where in the Saurian clinical system, it was noted a prostatectomy without lymphadenectomy. But obviously in the surgery, something else was done on the patient. So the prostatectomy was done with the lymphadenectomy. And you need to find out which one is the true information at that case, which you can really set on and reuse. You will need to eliminate duplicates, and you will find out that some documents are being documented in the clinical system exclusively for the certification process. So you have some extra work also for the clinicians in order to have all the data complete. It's not that you can just take what is there, but you will find out, oh, I need that field or I need this field. And suddenly you are confronted with putting up extra forms to document these fields, and you give the clinicians extra work, and that must be well prepared, because otherwise the clinicians will tell you, we don't have the time to do that. And a problem is, for example, in our case, we were a certified cancer center, and the thorough review of the data was not immediately, but was often with a time delay of, for example, 1 year. So 1 year later, you have to find out what is the inconsistency, how did it take place, and how do you explain to the auditors for your certification that you have this inconsistency, which is not so easy. Some other time-dependent situations which you will encounter is, for example, changes in the classifications. If you look at different UICC status, they had a change, for example, between the 2002 and the 2009 UICC, where they just turned around. PT4A was a neighborhood organ and PT4B was a serosa. And in the 2009, it was just the other way around. How do you deal with that for a patient who is in long-term treatment and who might have his first data in here and his second data maybe here? And how do you use that? And at the clinical level, within the clinical system, you must typically know which status was used at which date. So for the time between 2002 and 2009, you would use that one, and between 2009 and later on, you would use that one. For registry documentation, you would want to have the current version, which is probably that one. And if you do clinical studies, you want to define which version do we do during the study, which is valid for the study. Another example, our knowledge in medicine about our patients changes over time. Let's have a patient who has in a CT a suspected metastasis of the liver. We don't know for exactly, and we would do some surgery on the patient. During surgery, the surgeon would examine the liver and would say, oh, the liver feels perfectly fine. I couldn't see any nodes, anything else. This is an M0 clinically. And 4 weeks after the discharge, you do maybe a ultrasound geared biopsy or something else because you have some suspicion, and suddenly the biopsy is positive and you have a liver metastasis for the patient. So that is all for one patient at different points in time. How do you deal with it? Clinical documentation, you have a date, and at that date, this is valid information. At that date, this is valid information, and it only changes when this is the new information which is added on. In the registry documentation, you would want to have a generic interpretation. So for that case, you would probably look at the patient and would say, okay, taking all the data, he is probably an M1 and not an M0 state, because here we have a positive metastasis. And for study documentation, you are again depending on your study protocol, and you want to have traceability. You want to know what happened when with the patient. So depending on in which stage of a study you are, you will probably have the ECRFs with the different data in it. So these examples show that even if all the technical problems are being solved, you are not finished with your work, but you have to think carefully, how do you use the data and what do you use the data for? I take this example. For example, the registry wants to have
Thomas,
a ripe
I
banana.
need to
Yes.
just fast jump in here because we're running out of time and we still want to keep a bit for the Q&A. So if
Yes.
we can wrap up slowly.
I'm finished in about two more slides. And the two more slides are we will have some problems in future which we need to deal more with, that is temporal relationships between data. It does make a difference if you have a diabetes during pregnancy or before or afterwards pregnancy. It does make a difference if you have first an ischemic stroke and then a thrombolysis and then a cerebral bleed. So we have to think about these temporal relationships. And that's nearly the last slide. Well, it is, I think, the last slide. AI in medicine may help us in future taking more data from unstructured text. And we need to look more exactly where do we need 100% exactness, that is for clinical treatment, and where can we do with the inexactness which we have in artificial intelligence, where we maybe have only 99.8%. That could be, for example, for patients which we want to include in studies because there will be in second stage process, and that makes sure that we get the right patients. That's all from my side. Thank you very much, and sorry for being a bit slow.
No worries, it's just a lot of information that's very valuable. So it's nothing about the speed, it's just about the amount itself. So thank you for bringing such a good overview together. We have two questions, like not more questions, but like two remarks in the chat. If someone wants to jump in while we still have a few minutes for the Q&A, please raise your hand. So far, I will probably mention the question from Helena, who was asking about the more or less the interoperability of the health data and also the combination between genetic and clinical data being collected not only in hospitals but also in the lab values obtained in POC that do not match lab line analysis. So like, how do you deal with that? And did you see some progress later in accelerating solving this interoperability challenges on your side?
In the projects I was involved, we used data which was of clinical grade validity. That means we use data gained from either examinations inside the hospitals or from physicians who worked outside, but who were in an accredited status, or labs who were accredited for human use. So I don't have a good answer for this.
Okay. So Helena, I hope that satisfies your interest, at least on this regards. I saw that you went on camera to probably jump in. And I don't see any hands up. If there are some, please use your chance now to ask the question to Thomas. But I would want to make a question out of the comment that Max Lupiner made in the chat regarding the challenges that I think that are all obvious to us, that actually the legal requirements are one of the most visible deal breakers in all the progress that we are doing. And there might be some solutions and some workflows that are elaborated throughout the whole way, but then there is legal regulation that breaks the queue. So do you have some hints or on how to also influence that, or any probably challenges to share on how you had to pivot your processes because something was not possible legally?
That is a very good question, actually. And at Erlangen University Hospital, we reacted by building with other German sites together a generic consent form, which should be signed by the patients on admission, because The problem will be normally you should consent as a patient to have your data reused for a certain study. But with data reuse projects, you might reuse the data for other studies later on. You must, at least in German legal requirements, assure that the patient can at any stage redraw his consent and his data is then taken out of those studies which have not yet started. If he withdraws his consent and some studies have already been started, the data may still be used. That is my last knowledge from the topic, in case he has assigned such a generic consent. And to develop that generic consent was a work of at least a year or longer. It was not easy. It was with many legal requirements.
Okay, thank you. And I will take the last, I hope, short question from Basim. There are two actually faces on the screen, so please go live and ask your question directly.
Hello, hi, thank you so much for all the presentation and the information. My question goes in the last bit, the last slide. Actually, it's about the difference in the quality of that is needed for clinical data in the use in a clinical setting, which means either one doctor deciding on a patient case or a group of doctors like in the tumor board, making a clinical decision making, whether for the diagnosis or the case management. What is the difference of the quality that is needed in terms of structureness, etc., compared to the clinical studies? Rian.
Was I the only one who had difficulties to understand the question fully? I just tried to answer to what I did understand. I think your question was something about data quality and if the data quality is recorded at the place in the way it should be recorded. For cancer documentation, as I said, it was a common effort for the University Hospital of Erlangen that we wanted to become a comprehensive cancer center and a certified cancer center. So the head physicians agreed on that, and with the physicians and other co-workers cooperating in that effort had to collect also some extra data in the quality required just for the certification process. That's not ideal, but I think that will also be the situation if you go into studies. If you go into the studies, you usually have study nurses, and the study nurses will still do some manual collecting, so you can't do everything in an automated way. And as they are trained study nurses, they are also trained to do that in the appropriate quality. So it will always be something like a semi-automated process, like the import into cancer registry, not fully automated.
Thank you for your answer, Thomas. And now it's a high time to move further to Sebastiano, who is our second expert for today. I would welcome you on stage without further ado, not to steal more of your presentation time.
Sure, thanks. Can you?
Yes, you just need to go full screen.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thanks a lot, Yana, for the introduction and for the invitation to the webinar. I'm Sebastiano Caprara from the Balgrist University Hospital, and it's a pleasure to present our ongoing project to maybe, connecting to the last comment from Thomas, to trying to automate some process for data collection and data standardization. Our project is called L-Data Repository, and it's really, the motivation is to support data-driven clinical research. I will start with some facts about the Balgrist University Hospital for the one of you that do not know Balgrist. We are a musculoskeletal hospital focusing on orthopedics. We have teams focusing on different anatomical structure, and we have different competence center, spine center, Zurich. We have a tumor center and a center for paraplegia. And just to give some numbers about our, dimension, we are dealing with pretty complex cases. So we have a case mix index of 1.4, 91 outpatient consultation last year, and 5,700 inpatient. the research environment, it's really close to the clinic one. We have 18 PIs, principal investigator from both the University of Zurich and ETH, 5 group leaders, and overall 250 people working, on research. And we are really focusing on, musculoskeletal medicine, imaging, biomarkers, and we aim always to translate research activity back to the clinic. I am the head of the digital medicine unit, trying to, interface the research and the IT department to try to translate some requirements sometimes. And also, trying to have an overview on personalized medicine initiative, digital health initiative that we are involved in. So I spoke about how close we are between the clinic and the research. You see here 2 buildings. One is the actual clinic, the Balgrist clinic, and below we have our Balgrist campus, which is the research facility. And the goal with this setting, we're really trying to bring needs from the patient with physician, and we really have the concept of physician scientists, so people that understand the patient but understand the science as well, trying to bring the needs of the patient into science, and then hopefully for the successful project to R&D and to with partnership with industry back to the patient with actual product. And of course, in this setting, the data flow is becoming more and more important. If we think about AI tools, support tools for clinical practice, this loop is very, very important. Some lighthouse project to present you a little bit the research we are doing. We had the Hochschulmedizin Zurich flagship project Surgeon Enhancing Technologies, where in December 2020, Professor Master Farshad, clinical director of Balgrist, performed the world first holographically navigated spine surgery. So we are working with augmented reality glasses, and another project we are working with the robotic navigation system, a Horizon project, Pharos from the ROX team at Balgrist, where we are trying to optimize the interface between surgeon and robotic within the surgical room. But let's focus on data and on the IT environment we have at Balgrist. So in the last year, we really tried to develop our clinical information system to collect clinically relevant data together with the medical image archive system, which is the PACS. And here we have really a central platform for the clinic where we are able to optimize the communication between the different clinical departments, but also with the patient. We have a Balgrist app where we can communicate with the patient for appointments, for questionnaire, and different things. But what we are still missing is a way to connect to this central platform unstructured data that we are measuring and acquiring and collecting in a more research setting. We have sport medicine that is measuring lactate diagnostic, ECG, spiroergometry, and those data are still in another data silos, which is not digitally connected to the central clinical platform. And the health data repository project aims to increase this availability of data, to be able also in the future to add data from different providers. You can think about wearables and different devices that in the future will become more and more relevant. So with this additional system, we are trying to have a really comprehensive patient-centric view, and also give accessibility to both patients and physicians to additional data set that will be available in the future. This is, of course, very important for research as well, because if we spoke about the data quality and how we are able to collect comprehensive data set for, to support data-driven medicine and personalized medicine project, this patient-centric overview will allow us to query data relevant for a research project in a more comprehensive way. I will spend 2 words because also Thomas touched on this, how some processes are working now also at Balgrist. For all this project that we have, augmented reality, we have a lot of AI based project for image analysis and biomechanical simulation. We have to collect a lot of data from the clinical system. Those a lot of data means clinical information system, demographic data, questionnaire, images, of course, is really important in orthopedics, biobank that was mentioned before, and this was done manually. Thomas mentioned study nurses, researchers, physicians that goes into the system with the support of the IT and extract data that might be relevant for a clinical study. Of course, extracting data means that you have to go in, check if a patient has a general consent. We also have a general consent in Zurich, de-identify the data set and prepare the data set in a standardized way for a specific research project. And this is true for augmented reality, it's true for different movement analysis that we are doing. And how you do that? You do a lot of manual. You have a lot of manual effort, and you use Excel, because Excel, you have a nice table. You can, standardize your fields that you need for the research project. You do your de-identification, and then you give the Excel to the researcher. That's on the clinical side, so how much effort is needed to extract the data. But also on the research side, what happens is that you have a lot of decentralized platform where the researchers are just performing their research, they are training the machine learning models, and they validate with the specific high quality data set that someone prepared, and then you publish. The problem is that going back from such a structure and use the outcome of the research in a clinical setting is very, very difficult, because without centralized process, bringing the outcome of data-driven medicine or research back to the patient and to the clinicians is very difficult. So our vision, and we are working towards it with the Health Data Repository project, is to connect all the system. We are working with API, application programming interface. We are manually now, and then it will be automated, building connectors from the API to all the different silos, data silos that we have in the clinic. And the difference maybe to others approaches is that we are not creating an additional data warehouse per se. We are not taking data that are already in a database, let's say, and copying all the database to another data warehouse and then performing research. But with this API, we are aiming at a connection between this clinical system, and then when we are able to extract data for research with a general consent and with the identification process, we perform data mapping. Thomas also mentioned data mapping. When we do this data extraction with this API, we are able to map the data from the different silos to, for example, the FHIR standards, so that on the research side, we are able to have a standardized data set. And the idea here will be to have a patient-centric data model where we are able to combine different data from different software or tools into one view. And you see the first things that for us for this discussion is the most important is the digital consent, digital general consent of patient. So this is of course a must if we want to then perform the data extraction and move from the clinical tools to the research platform. So if this exists, if a general consent exists, we are able to move a patient and map the data to a FHIR standard in a clinical study. Also, a point that Thomas mentioning is really important is the ability to track those data then in the studies as well. And here we are working towards a master patient index, meaning that we are able to track the actual real patient ID that is used in the clinical system with a pseudonymized ID in the different studies. So we know which patient is involved in which study. And with we, I mean the clinical part. Of course, the researcher does not have access to those information, but there is a clear interface between what's the clinic part and what's the research part. Of course, here I'm presenting the use case of pseudonymization. There could be research project where we do anonymization of data, and in this case, this connection between the master patient index and the different studies will not exist. But this is very important for the future also to be able to track which patient is in which studies. And then if a patient withdraw their consent, we are able also to go into studies, select the data that are actually owned by this patient and delete it from a specific studies. Because both of these standards were mentioned, we are working towards the standardization of this let's say, data set for clinical studies. We're working to FHIR and DICOM for medical images, so that we are able to use international standards on the research side to be able to perform the research we want to do, and also to achieve this interoperability that is important for research collaboration. And this is why here I would like to mention the Loop Zurich, which is a planned platform, biomechanical platform between the University Hospital in Zurich. And the idea here is that because we have this API, because we are able to collect data that might be used in research project in a standardized way and in a de-identified way, we can have a clear interface with external collaborators, and we can share standardized data set with other hospitals to have a combined data set, larger data set, hopefully, where we can do research. So of course, here I'm just talking about the technicality. There is the whole data governance part where only some people that are involved in the project will be able to access this data, depending on the ethic proposal that, of course, needs to be accepted before starting the project. But this is more about what should be possible with this implementation. So we look more at the research side at this point, but for us, again, it's very important to be able to bring the output and the outcome of this research back into the clinic. So what we are doing also on a more clinical level, patient level, is the introduction of a FHIR repository. This means we are able to save additional data which are structured as the one we are using in the research platform, and connect this with other clinical tools, so that we are able to add data, of course, more towards research data, but this will be also visible from physicians, and it's really available. So this new data should be available for the clinical process as well. And the idea here is really the ability to perform data-driven medicine, to have additional insight in standard clinical data, and also give those insights back to the clinician and make those visible to physicians, to study nurses, to the patient as well, and so on. An example can be natural language processing for clinical coding. Thomas mentioned this, the process of coding clinical data set is very it's a huge effort, and if in the future we will have some machine learning support for that, it's very nice to be able to integrate it in the clinical process. Another can be the analysis of radiological images, so we can extract the medical images from the normal clinical database. We can perform a research project, and then if the research project is very successful and we are able to classify osteoporotic the osteoporotic value of a bone, with this structure we will be able to take this information, bring it back to the clinician, and show the output of a machine learning model to the clinicians. I'm not talking about certification of medical product, and this is a whole different discussion, but the technical infrastructure should be able to allow this. I would like to spend just one word about one very big project we are having in Balgrist. Is the ORX will be a translational center for surgical data science, and this will acquire a lot of data set on intraoperative images, 3D models of bone structure, and the idea is that we will be able to create new data-driven tools for intraoperative navigation, for image analysis, for biomechanical simulation, and those we really would like to have then those new tools back to the physician, and for this we are preparing this this architecture in general. Of course, this helps us also with the communication with different partners, because we are talking about intraoperable data and standards, and not just for research, but really also for patient. We can prepare a questionnaire, patient-reported outcome, and all this communication, because we have a centralized process, will be easier. And I will finish just with the vision of Balgrist. So before I show this patient-centric model, and this is the data that we have, the goal will be to add additional insight into a patient with what they so-called digital twins, and make those in additional information visible to physicians. And for this we are creating this architecture. The last slide is just maybe a take-home message, and how the digitalization itself helps us, but also our patient. And we have a digital twin for personalized prognosis. We have shorter surgical times. We have a better recovery, and at the end, better quality of life. And this is everything from my side.
Great.
Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sebastiano, for also keeping the time so perfectly. We have already a question and a comment in the chat. If someone else wants to join the discussion, please raise your hand. But I would refer first to the comment that Helena posted in the chat. So probably because a lot has been mentioned since you wrote it during the presentation, probably you could adjust it a bit and elaborate by jumping in. Could you unmute yourself and just,
yes.
if your question is still valid, ask it directly?
Yes, it's still valid. Thank you, Sebastiano, for this input. The problem is you have to do with data silos. Well, everybody, of course. And the context of the aging individual, of course, has a major impact. Bones already taking this. So how to be sure that the training models you set up get somehow along with the bias we have in data collection, because we need to go in this all these knowledge graphs, and we know very well how bad data collectors physicians are, we are, and how big the variety. Yeah? If we take blood pressure of every single person here in the room and take it 10 minutes later, it will have a completely other value. And you have to take at the moment a value and feed it in the system. But then when somebody else takes over part of your project, he has not the same semantic attitude and not the same context thinking as you, or also the former speaker or whoever here.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. How we will deal with the validity of AI models in general in medicine, right? Again, I wanted to show the architecture that could allow the integration of those models in a clinical workflow. How can we ensure that those models are ready to clinical deployment? That's another topic, and we will maybe talk about regulation, how to make sure that models are not biased, and that we are able to, also sustainability of those models in the future. I think that the infrastructure I shows with the difference between clinic and research or digital platform allows to have some sort of sandbox to test those models out, and making sure that before we are going into the clinic, we address the question that you mentioned. But I don't have a direct question. How can we make sure that the model will be, sustained and maintained for the next 50 years? That's a different topic where maybe some regulations are also needed.
In fact, having heard just yesterday Federal Office of Public Health about digital health ID, well, we didn't get collectively drunk. If somebody from there is in, sorry guys, but if it's not the experts as you are here in that bring in the minimum needed to get it well, it will get a mess. You see what happens now in the European Parliament discussions, and politicians are not the people that do good regulations, we know. So sorry, I will have to jump off to the next meeting, but thanks for the organization, and it's the most important topic. Sorry.
Thank you, Helena, for your time and for joining us today. Yes, as we are running out of time, I suggest that we do like an official wrap up, but if Sebastiano doesn't mind, we still have 2 questions, and if you can stay for 5 more minutes, and those who have their calendar open as well, we could still take 2 short questions to wrap up the discussion. And for those who cannot stay, thank you so much for joining us today and spending this insightful hour. And you will receive the follow-up email shortly with the recording and a bit more information about the programs me and Gundula represent. And now I want to move to the question from Monica. You have your hand up, so please jump in.
Thank you, Yana, and thank you, Sebastiano, for this great presentation. It was very informative. I have 2 questions, and these are around the digital twin that you are planning to use. So the first question that I wanted to ask you is that the aim is to use the digital twin in order to help you with the AI, let's say the virtual reality simulated operations. Is this the ultimate aim of using digital twin? It was not clear for me. And then the second question I wanted to ask you is that in the schematic that you had on the enhanced patient model, the way you're building your digital twin is based on the real data that you are collecting through these various domains across your hospital. Is that right?
So maybe I will start with the second question, just because what I show is the vision, right? I think we have to maybe differentiate between having a digital twin of someone and training all your models, AI models, so that you are able to build a digital twin. Meaning, when we collect data for a research project, then we train an AI model that maybe in the future can work on real world data and build then a digital twin of a patient. And that's the vision. First, you need the research project, the anonymization of data, and then you go into this digital platform. You can train your models, and then this model should come back to the clinical level and do inference on the real world data that you mentioned. But this is then not at a research level, it should be at a clinical level. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I understand.
And then you can build a patient-specific digital twin and integrate into clinical process. For your first question, how we aim to use them, I believe multiple ways potentially. We worked on surgical planning. Of course, we are an orthopedics clinic, so we are really much focused on 3D models of bone and muscle structure, so that we can, sorry, on one end visualize those 3D, before the surgery, but also then really try to, plan where we will put the implants, then screw, depending on the bone quality within the bone. And also, if you are going until the biomechanical simulation, you can also see how the implant and the surgical procedures might affect the biomechanic of a patient in the future, so after the operation. That's the vision. We are doing part of it, like where is the optimal place to position a screw, because you have the bone quality, you have the 3D models, and you can optimize the screw position. But the vision will be to have really a pre-operative surgical planning, intraoperative procedures, how it should be optimized, and post-operative biomechanical analysis.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Monica, for your questions. And then there was a short question from Basim, actually, regarding their approach behind the project, and how many people are involved in that. And just to be more on the effort side, how long did it take from the beginning to get to the place where you're right now, and how big is the team, and how many resources did you have to involve to actually assure that it's possible? Because it looks like a lot that has been already done. So what's behind it?
So we are not done. Again, maybe my presentation was a mix between vision and what we have already. This needs to be clear. We have, I mentioned the loop. This is an ongoing initiative where we also get some support to connect to this initiative. We are a university hospital, so I'm really, so our group is sitting in the middle between the IT department and researcher. So we are trying to, do what is more clinically relevant with the IT resources, because that's how it should be done. But trying to align this effort with this vision, and this is the same for the research side. I'm involved in grants and writing research proposal, making sure that you have resources for the research project, yes, but also to work on infrastructure and aligning them with the IT resources. If someone is from research, it's really difficult to get infrastructure resources with research proposal, but that's something we try. Maybe sorry. Sometime the project is going on since 3 years now, and let's say we will work on it for sure for the next 2 years. We are a team of 4 people at the moment, but again, I have a lot of interfaces with the IT and with the researcher.
Thank you. I think it's also like the great illustration of how the collaboration is important into solving this questions and problems, because one side is never enough, and it's a great wrap up to also illustrate that the open innovation in this matters is the key for the radical solution. That's what we at Digital Health Nation are trying to boost through the innovation booster, and what Databooster is also doing in their field. So Gundula, do you want also to thank all the participants and shortly jump in?
Yes, sure. So also thank you from my side. I was impressed that there was a really a good discussion, and I'm looking forward that you also join the Databooster events, especially when it comes to concrete ideas. So if you are interested to do some innovative stuff, shaping your ideas in terms of database related, then please come in touch with me. We will send you our contact information afterwards.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who even extended their agenda for today. We appreciate your interest in the topic, and we hope you join us for the future events as well. Have a productive rest of the day and efficient week, and goodbye.